Welcome to Lesson 6.1, Solving Equations. The purpose of this lesson is to solve equations using two different methods, and the methods are called inspection and systematic trial. So we just finished Unit 1, and in Unit 1 you learned how to read, represent, and write algebraic expressions and equations. And so we're moving into not just being able to identify what an equation is and how to write an equation using a variable, a constant term, and the numerical coefficient, but to take it the next step further and to actually solve it, to figure out what that variable equals. So Chapter 6 is all about different methods to solve algebraic equations, but the two methods we're going to focus on today are inspection and systematic trial. So inspection, let's just define these before we go. Inspection is finding the value, oops, I see I made a spelling mistake, finding the value for the variable by using addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. And systematic trial is a little bit like guess and check, where you're choosing a value for the variable, substituting it into the equation, and then you're using your answer and reasoning to kind of choose another value until you solve it successfully. And we're going to go through some examples of both of those methods and what they would look like. Before we move on, I just wanted to review a concept covered in Chapter 1, the chapter we just completed, which is the difference between an equation and an expression. Chapter 6 focuses on solving equations, and so it's just important that we recognize the difference between those two things before we move on. So I've written 4 things down, and I just want you to take a couple seconds to see if you can spot the equations and if you can spot the expressions and why. So the main difference is in expression, it just expresses something, whereas an equation equals something. You don't have an equation if you don't have an equal sign, okay? So this first one here, that would be an expression because we don't see an equal sign. In order to have an equation, you have to have two sides that are equal. That's where that beginning part of equation comes from. I see we do have an equal sign here, so this is an equation. 5x plus 2 equals 27. I see an equal sign. That means two sides have to be equal. We can solve for that variable. That means that is an equation. Oops. And then our last one, 5x plus 2. That's just expressing something. That's telling me maybe a relationship between two things, but I don't see an equal sign, so that's not an equation because it's not solvable. So we couldn't solve for the value of x there, so that is an expression. The first method that we're going to learn for solving equations in algebra is called systematic trial. And like I said, that's just kind of guess and checking. I've put the definition up in the corner here just to remind us. So it's just to choose a value for your variable. So in this example, our variable is the d. Remember, your variable is always the letter that you see represented in your equation. You substitute that value in for your variable, and then you see if your equation makes sense or if it's true. So let's go through an example of what that might look like. So I have my equation 3d plus 5, and I'm asked to solve this using systematic trial. So that says I have to choose a value for my variable. So without giving it a whole lot of thought, I'm going to choose the value 2 to start with. So I'm just going to substitute 2 in for my variable, which is d. So then my equation looks like 3 times 2 plus 5. And I want to see if that equals 17. So let's just continue to solve this. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 plus 5, that equals 11. So I see 11 and 17 are not the same. So 2 is not the correct value for my variable. However, I do notice 11 is smaller than 17. So that tells me that I have to increase the value of my variable for my next attempt at systematic trial. So knowing that I have to increase the value for my variable, I'm going to choose the number 5. And I'm going to do the same process. I'm just going to substitute 5 in for my variable, and then solve. So my new equation then looks like 3 times 5 plus 5. And then we'll solve to see if that equals 17. So I know that 3 times 5 is 15 plus 5. And then I know that 15 plus 5 is 20. So once again, my answer and this answer don't match, or they're not equal. So I know that 5 is not the value for my variable. So 2 is not the value, 5 is not the value. However, I do notice that 20 is larger than 17. So I've gone too high with my variable. I know that the value for my variable is somewhere in between 2 and 5 because 17 falls in between 11 and 20. So for next, I'm just going to choose another value, knowing that it has to be in between 2 and 5. So I'm going to choose 4, and we're going to do the same thing and just solve and put it into our equation. So 3 times 4 plus 5, and we're just going to continue. 3 times 4 is 12. 12 plus 5 is 17. So I can see now that the answer in my original equation is 17, and I have gotten 17, which means 4 is the value for my variable. So D in this example would equal 4. So like I said before, systematic trial is really kind of a series of guessing and checking and using your reasoning skills to help you come up with the correct value for your variable in order to solve the equation. The important part here, make sure to show all of your work, and even if it takes you 3, 4, 5, 6 attempts to get the correct variable, you're showing your work and you're showing your thinking. So always record all of the steps that you're taking when you're solving with systematic trial. So the second method that we're going to learn today for solving equations is called inspection, and I've put the definition up in the corner here again. So inspection is finding the value for your variable by using addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, whatever is necessary in the question that you're given. So I'm going to use the same question as we just used, so 3D plus 5 equals 17, but we're going to solve it this time using inspection. So when I look at this equation, the first thing that I kind of think of is I don't know what D is, but I know that whatever 3 multiplied by D is, that when I add it to the number 5, it's going to equal 17. So something plus 5 equals 17. And so I think to myself, okay, what added to 5 would equal 17? And I know that 12 added to 5 equals 17. So I know that this 3D and this 12 are equal. Whatever that D is, when it's multiplied by 3, the product is going to be 12. So then I think to myself, if I know that 3D equals 12, what multiplied by 3 equals 12? So I know that when I go 3 multiplied by 4, that gives me a product of 12. So 4 becomes the value for my variable. But just to double check, I'm going to go back and I'm going to substitute it into my equation just to make sure I'm correct. So I'm going to replace my variable D with the number 4 equals 17. 3 multiplied by 4 is 12. 12 plus 5 equals 17. So I know that in this situation, D equals 4 because that makes my equation true. It makes my statement true. And so just to kind of review what we just did and why this is using the method of inspection, we've used addition and we've used multiplication to help us solve for the value of our variable. And again, it's important to remember, please show all of your work, show your steps when you're thinking, kind of lay out all the steps, whatever you're doing in your head. I know this is kind of a method that involves some mental math and some thinking, but whatever you're thinking in your head, put it on the paper so I can see your thought process and kind of the steps you're taking to solve the equation.